people knew that we had respect for the music and a great passion for it and would go to all lengths to learn firsthand. And they were so kind, Howling Wolf and Muddy Waters and Otis Rush, to teach us this music and to let us sit in. At first, we were just novices, but eventually, after a few months, they got used to us and they were like, they didn't, this is the first time that something like this had ever happened.
Hey everybody, it's Mike Jeffers and welcome to another episode of Around Town. I am very happy to have as a special guest today, the great Barry Goldberg. He is coming into town for a few different reasons, actually. He's coming in specifically because the film that was made about himself and many other musicians around that era in the 60s, Born in Chicago, is going to be shown at the Chicago Blues Festival on Friday, June 9th at 1 p.m., the Claudia Cassidy Theater in the Cultural Center. So all the information is at bluesfestguide.com. Barry's coming in for that. He's also going to be doing a live interview Thursday, June 8th at Pianoforte on WDCB 90.9 FM from noon until 1 p.m. And then he's also going to be playing in Chicago at Reggie's on Friday night after the fest at 9:30 p.m. as part of the Blues Super Session. And all the information there is at reggieslive.com. Barry, you have a very busy weekend coming into Chicago for the Blues Fest. So are you excited? I'm glad you're coming back to Chicago and you're going to be able to experience all of this stuff.
I'm very excited. Every time I can get back home, and Chicago is my home, is where my father was born. My grandfather came here from Russia and settled in Chicago. So all the Chicago sports teams are my favorite teams in sports. My son is a Chicago sports fan. I love Italian beef sandwiches and deep dish pizza. I'm just a Chicago kid at heart, but spent a lot of time in Los Angeles. But Chicago is my home, and I'm very excited to be coming home.
Well, we're excited to have you back. And I'll tell you, let me preview a little bit. I'll give some people a little bit of a background just so that they know you're coming in specifically because of Born in Chicago, the film that came out. It actually came out in 2013, but it's about to be available on streaming this summer. And once I get more information on that, we'll let everybody know. But you can actually see the entire film for free at the Chicago Blues Festival, 1 p.m., Claudia Cassidy Theater at the Cultural Center. And Barry, the film really is an incredible documentation about how you got introduced to blues. And, back in the early 60s, it was just kind of unheard of, right? For some white kids from the north side of Chicago to come into the west side and the south side of Chicago. And you're playing with the masters, the guys that were inventing this stuff. And they were really welcoming to you, which I know as a musician, when people know you're serious about the music, it doesn't matter who you are or where you came from, they want to help you get better at it. And it sounds like that's exactly what your experience was. Why don't you talk a little bit, just briefly, about when you first, I think it was Silvio's that you went to first, right? You met Howlin Wolf and sat in. I mean, what was that experience like just to hear it live, finally, hear them play live?
Well, before that, we were a bunch of us, and we were like misfits in the beginning, like an attraction. But eventually, the people that we would go down to the south side and west side of Chicago, sit in clubs called Silvio's, Peppers, the Blue Flame Lounge, because of our love of this music that we heard at the end of the dial on our little radios at home, and wanted to find out firsthand what this music was. We were all into rock and roll, but this was something else. This music created a spell, and it was different. And it was like, it started like out to be like the becoming of age. Like we went down there, they were the great masters, and our passion and honesty took us through. The people knew that we had respect for the music and a great passion for it, and would go to all lengths to learn firsthand. And they were so kind, Howling Wolf and Muddy Waters and Otis Rush, to teach us this music and to let us sit in. At first, we were just novices, but eventually, after a few months, they got used to us and they were like, this is the first time that something like this had ever happened. And it was a special time in Chicago blues music history because you had all the greats playing around town. And it was like a wonderland for us just to go around and playing with these giants. And they were just not only giant musicians and great stars, they were wonderful people as well.
Isn't that interesting too? Because I think a lot of people in 2023, I mean, now we have the largest free Chicago Blues Fest in the entire country. So it's the largest blues fest in the entire country in Chicago. And, you know, all of these names are worldwide names, but back then blues was like an underground music, right? It wasn't on the mainstream. So it wasn't like it is now. And when you guys were going down there, it was like you were discovering something and bringing it back to other parts of Chicago too, right?
We brought it back to the Northside and a club called Big John's. And eventually, we left Chicago to go to San Francisco with the Paul Butterfield Band, the Electric Flag. Mike Bloomfield and myself were best buddies. Michael had spoken to Bill Graham, who booked the Fillmore. He was Mr. Fillmore and Mr. San Francisco Music, about these wonderful, great, if you like us, you should hear these guys. These are the originals. And we sort of returned the favor and passed the torch back again to these great blues guys like B.B. King and Muddy, and got them booked on the West Coast as well and expanded their careers.
Well, and Bill Graham, I mean, you know, I know Bill Graham from the Grateful Dead and all of the 60s bands and everything. He was a huge promoter and a real true entrepreneur in music. And I'm sure that he saw the opportunity and said, and he was a huge music fan. I know from reading a lot about him and stuff and knowing that. And this had to be right up his alley. I mean, this had to be something, but be able to get somebody like Billy Graham behind it and to bring them out there. I probably couldn't have happened unless you approached Bill Graham about it, right? Because they weren't on their radar, and those guys were kind of in Chicago and moving around on a kind of a different circuit, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. We were in sort of the psychedelic blues.
Yeah.
We were playing a combination of all different kinds of music, because of course blues was at the forefront of anything we ever did. Guys like Steve Miller, Charlie Musselwhite. Charlie and I cut a record in Chicago called Stand Back. That was a really cool record with Fred Velo on drums and little Bob Anderson on bass. And that's a record I'm very proud of. Michael and I produced a James Cotton album, Pure Cotton, on Verve Records, the best of Verve, James Cotton. And there's certain moments in my career that I'm really proud of as far as the blues is concerned. Percy Sledge is another one, artist that I produce.
Yeah.
And we actually got a blues award for that, a Grammy nomination. And Buddy Guy beat us out that year, but it was great to be beat out by Buddy Guy.
Well, I mean, you know, and I want to remind everybody as we're talking, Born in Chicago, the film, the documentary film is at the Blues Fest, June 9th, Friday, 1 p.m. And then after that, Barry's going to be there along with the director, John Anderson, and Bob Sarlis, and he's going to be there too. And there's going to be a panel discussion. So you're going to be able to talk to them directly and ask questions. And I know it's going to be an incredible conversation. All the information is at bluesfestguide.com. You know, Barry, you and I could talk for like 10 hours about your career. So I'm trying not to go down those wormholes so that you and I can stay on track a little bit. But I mean, you brought up all these different musicians that you've played with, and you know, the different things that you've produced over the years, and we're not even touching on half of them. But go all the way back to the beginning. I mean, how did you get interested in playing keyboard and piano and everything? I mean, that to me is like very interesting, because that kind of tracks the whole momentum of you hearing something on the radio and going down and then seeing these masters play. I'm curious to know how you first got into music. How did you first find it like something that you really wanted to pursue?
Well, my mother was a keyboard player. She was also on the Yiddish stage. She was an actress. And she taught me how to, the first song that I think we learned together, we used to play duets on the piano. We had a piano at home, and it was Chattanooga Shoeshine Boy by Red Foley. And that da 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 da. And that sort of instilled that kind of rhythm and feeling. And I went a little further a few years later and discovered guys like Meade Lux Lewis. And of course, I was into Jerry Lee Lewis, you know, and all those great keyboard players. And Otis Spann became a friend and an idol of mine, along with Johnny Johnson. And Johnny was kind enough to teach me a left hand because my hands are small. They're not like long fingers, and my stride piano playing is not really the reach that I would like to have. So Johnny said, no need to do that, and showed me a shorter version of a left hand, which I use every time I play the piano, and it really and it works, you know. And he was just, I mean, the funkiest, coolest guy, you know. Chuck Berry's piano player.
You know, it's interesting to me because he showed you that, and then you took it and created your own sound out of that, obviously, but finding these little things. And that's really what you got out of going down and first being introduced to all these masters, right? I mean, you can't learn this stuff by listening to it. Sometimes you have to really go out and see it live as well, and really get to know somebody and really get to know the relationship between that person and their music, so that you can create a relationship between you and the music. Isn't that true?
Well, that was the idea of the whole thing, that we learned directly from the masters.
Yeah.
And we learned directly playing alongside of them in their clubs, and which became our clubs. And it was a whole love affair with the blues that happened at a special time in Chicago, where those great artists were known as great artists, like, and Muddy Waters, There'll Never Be Another Muddy, There'll Never Be Another Howling Wolf. You know, maybe they're up and coming in the ranks, but I'm not aware of it. You know, and even Jimi Hendrix, you know, with Red House, like the blues is everywhere. You know, the Cream, all the English kids took it from the import records that they used to get. But the magic of what we did was learning it firsthand, and you can never buy that kind of magic. And the magic rubs off on you. It rubs off, you know. Even when I played with Bob Dylan, you know, his vibe rubs off. So you take a little bit anywhere you can get it of the great ones, and it becomes part of you, and you become stronger by it.
It's almost like they always say, you know, you should always play with people that are better than you, so that you can rise to the occasion, right? And you guys took it to the next level, where you went down and you played with these guys that were the masters at that moment. Talk a little bit about maybe one of your first steady gigs in Chicago, because, you know, you're sitting in, you're learning stuff, you're meeting these guys. Did you get picked up by somebody with one of these masters, or did you get a steady gig somewhere where all of a sudden, you know,
we after the Butterfield band left for New York and greater heights in Paul's career, I walking by a storefront on Wall Street in Old Town, and I heard this amazing guitar playing coming out. I said, "Man, that sounds like T-Bone Walker." And I looked in the window, and it was this kid shaking his head and playing his ass off, man. And this guy was just amazing. His name was Steve Miller. And so I knew that Big John's was looking for a replacement for the Butterfield band. So I asked Steve if he'd like to form a band with me. And he said, yeah, I'd love to. We got the gig right after Butterfield at Big John's. It lasted about a year. So that was our regular gig.
And having a steady at that time, I mean, that had to be, it's just, to your point, it's never going to happen again, where all these masters and all these guys in blues were founding it and creating it and doing all this in Chicago. But then to be able to be connected to them and also have a steady gig that you can work on this stuff all the time consistently in front of an audience, right? I mean, that's such a key point as a musician that's coming up through the ranks, isn't it?
how lucky was that? You know, just I look back on it, and my God, man, we hitched a ride on a rainbow, you know, and it was just a remarkable time in history, never to be equaled.
What did it feel like? And by the way, I should make sure everybody knows Barry Goldberg. He is coming into town. He's going to be doing a WDCB 90.9 FM interview noon to 1 p.m. on Thursday, June 8th. And then he's going to be performing at Reggie's as part of the Chicago Blues Super Session at 9:30 p.m. at Reggie's. Special guest Barry Goldberg. He'll be there Friday. And that's, of course, Reggie's in the South Loop, reggieslive.com. And he's going to be there at the screening of Born in Chicago. How did this whole film come about? Because what a documentary, first of all, and second of all, did you have the idea? Who had the idea? Talk a little bit about how this whole thing came about, because it's a fascinating documentary and it's incredibly well done.
Well, thanks, Mike. It's a labor of love, actually. And I felt that the story really had to be told. And there were so many of the Chicago guys that were still around, the survivors, like Nick Gravenitis, Corky Siegel, Harvey Mandel, Charlie Russell White, Steve Miller, you know, and their stories haven't really been told. You know, nobody knows that we learned that music firsthand. And it was what was coming out of us was the real deal. I mean, I'm not saying that the English kids, you know, took this and fabricated it in any way. They played great too.
Oh yeah.
But there's something you can't buy, or something you just can't get when it's 3,000 miles away. You know, when you're touched by it directly, you're touched by it. And that's what we had carrying around with us all these years to this day, being touched by the magic of the blues and the great masters, which will never happen again, and a special time in history in Chicago. And that's what we mean to be telling, and how it affected, you know, the great English musicians like Jagger and Keith Richards, and how it even affected Bob Dylan, how we were the Butterfield band, actually Bob Dylan backed Bob in his first electric performance, you know, so it went down to history.
How did you pitch this how did somebody come up with the concept and put this whole thing together as far as the film goes? Because I know it's not an easy process to get a film made, just first off, right? I mean, and it's so cool the way you guys have all these different artists talking about the times, and all this footage that you have too, and pictures and stuff. I mean, it's just, you can watch it hundreds of times and you still keep getting little bits and pieces of new knowledge out of it.
Well, it was a collective effort.
Yeah.
Tim Martin was our angel. Tim Martin made this all happen. And he brought in John Anderson, the great director and filmmaker, and Bob Sarles, the great director and filmmaker, and put the team together. And my wife and I had a lot to do with the production of the film, and what artists we were going to get. And the great footage by Sam Lay of the clubs in Chicago, the early days. You know, there you see little Walter at the bar, like holding court, and you see Wolf in his great tuxedo, you know, and New Year's Eve. Like it's something that to cherish, and a moment in time is captured, you know, a special time in that film, in our film. And it even has Bob Dylan's performance with Michael Bloomfield and myself, and Sam Lay on drums, the great and late Sam Lay. And they were like our family, extended family, you know, and we would babysit for their children, the great masters, do anything we can to get close to them and hear stories and get into their ways, like not just their music, but their ways as well. And it was a beautiful life, you know, it was a beautiful way to go. Uh, while everyone was sort of down on Rush Street, you know, and I spent my time down there and then in the Red Velvet clubs and during the Twist era, but my heart was on the south and west side of Chicago where we would go in and get real.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think there could ever be another time like that? And simply because outside of having all those guys here and everything, but just, you've produced so many things. You've produced and played on so many recordings and played with everybody in the entire world, all these millions of different people. I mean, because of the advent of YouTube and everything else, and the fact that all these clubs don't exist anymore, I don't think you'll ever have a club scene like you used to have in the 60s and 70s in Chicago, specifically like that. I don't know if they could ever have eras like this anymore. I don't know if it could ever happen again, just because it's just not the scene anymore.
Well, it is happening. There's a great blues community in Chicago now, and there always will be because Chicago is the blues. That's the Chicago blues is the best blues around, and recently I was inducted into the Chicago Blues Hall of Fame, and that means more to me than most of the awards that I've ever received. Like, being a part of that community and accepted, it's a wonderful thing. And I do feel that there's definitely is always something happening in the Chicago blues scene, something new, something to talk about. Listen to this guy, listen to that. And they're still doing it now.
Yeah.
Like that's where we're doing this super jam thing, at Reggie's, just because it's alive and well in Chicago. Maybe it can't reach, the magnitude of the Muddy Waters days or the Howling Wolf days, but it's definitely still alive and magic is still happening.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And actually, I did some interviews to preview for the Blues Fest for the city, and I've met some young blues musicians that are they're incredible, and they have a passion behind it, and they're in their mid to late 20s, and they're just, going strong. And I'm sure you're going to see some of them actually at Reggie's on June 9th. I'll remind everybody, June 9th, 9:30 p.m., the Chicago Blues Super Session with special guest Barry Goldberg. He's going to be there. And Barry, I thank you so much for jumping on today. And I thank you for putting this film together, because it would be lost in time, and it is so well done. I'm going to encourage everybody to check it out. There's going to be it's going to be online streaming at some point this summer. I think we're going to get some more information once that's official. But Friday, June 9th, 1 p.m., go check it out. And then you can actually meet and talk to Barry and the directors and just hear about this fascinating story and his fascinating life. I really appreciate you jumping on today, Barry.
It's my pleasure, Mike. Have you ever heard of Rob Stone?
Sure. Yeah. Yep.
And he's one of those younger guys coming up in the ranks.
That's right.
Along with the little Walter Tone. And I call him Rob Stone with the big boss tone. He'll be playing with me on a couple of those gigs too. I love Rob's playing, and he's a younger guy that's got the magic.
That's it. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I'm glad you mentioned that. You're right. So, all right, Barry, I appreciate you being on today, and thank you so much.
My pleasure, Mike.
We will see you in Chicago. And I want to thank everybody for watching. All the information about the Blues Fest is at bluesfestguide.com and, of course, chicagojazz.com. And until next time, hopefully I will see somebody out on the scene.